churches have very old, high pulpits. I stood in as many as I could when I went there. It was fun. Our connection to Transylvania for Unitarian Universalism has a very, very special year coming up in 2018. For next year marks the 450th anniversary of the Diet of Torda, an edict from John Sigismund, who was the prince in Transylvania, influenced by his personal physician, Giorgio Biondatra, and his court preacher, David Ferenc. He made a declaration of religious freedom following 10 years of debate in which those two advisors were very influential. And the Diet of Torda was proclaimed on January 13th, 1568. Its most quoted paragraph is near the end. It says, "In every place the preachers shall preach and explain the gospel, each according to his understanding of it. And if the congregation like it, well. If not, no one shall compel them, for their souls would not be satisfied. But they shall be permitted to keep a preacher whose teaching they approve. No one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone. And it is not permitted that anyone should threaten anyone else by imprisonment in matters of religion. For faith is but a gift of God." John Sigismund and his advisors, the Unitarians, were the most radical branch of Reformation Christianity. And when the king was converted to Unitarianism, and he had the chance to make Unitarianism at the center of his country, he did the opposite. He said, "We are not going to be in the center by ourselves, like Robert was. We are going to be in the center with everybody." Now, granted, at the time they didn't mean Muslims or Jews or Gypsies or anybody else, but for them, it was a pretty inclusive circle. The only Unitarian monarch in history decided he was a Unitarian, and he didn't make everyone else be a Unitarian as well. He decentered himself and stepped back. At the time, Transylvania was part of Hungary. And the people there were and still are Magyars, or Huns. And they spoke and still speak Hungarian. In 1916, during World War II, England, France, Italy, and Russia made a secret treaty with Romania in which they ceded what is now Transylvania to Romania, and there became part of Romania. After World War II, after Transylvania had gone back and forth a little bit with its political boundaries, Romania ceded some of its lands to Russia, and it got to keep Transylvania. Following the Second World War, Romania became part of the Soviet bloc. Transylvanian Unitarians and all Hungarians in Romania were oppressed by the communist government. Hungarian language was forbidden in schools, even in villages where everyone just spoke Hungarian, including Czechoslovakia. Even though no one spoke Hungarian at home in their daily lives, it was illegal to speak Hungarian in school. Everyone had to learn Romanian. Churches of all kinds were illegal under the communists in Romania, but especially the Unitarian ones, because most of the other churches that were illegal were Eastern Orthodox churches in Romania. And the Unitarians took an especially hard lump with the rule of the communists. And their practice had to be a bit underground, and they were oppressed. They were pushed out of the center. When the communists fell in 1989, religion was less oppressed, the churches started to revitalize, And the decades of communist rule were harsh. Our churches there were in disrepair. They had a lack of ministers. They didn't have funds. And so in 1993, the Unitarian Universalist Partner Church Council was started to match up congregations in America with congregations in Transylvania to help them rebuild. And our congregation became part of that movement. And we still have that partner church. The ethnic Hungarians and the Unitarians started to move a little bit more towards the center of things again. But there are still boundaries and barriers there in the Hungarian-speaking section of Transylvania and Romania. There is still a tension born of long years of being separated politically from Hungary. In fact, in every Unitarian church I went to, there was a Hungarian, not Romanian flag. The divisions are still kind of stark. People still feeling as Hungarians and Unitarians, they're still not allowed fully in the center of the own place where they live. Who and what are allowed at the center has many different levels in many cultures. While I was there, I saw that even in the Hungarian village, where the Hungarian Unitarians are still kind of battling a little bit for being at the center of the culture, there was another group that was even further removed from the center, the Gypsies. People of color originating in northern India centuries ago, now all over the world, lived in their own almost like segregated neighborhood in the village. Their experience is still decentered, less access to education, healthcare, jobs. Decentering and discrimination exists everywhere. Perhaps our human history is a history of trying to make the center and who's included in the circle bigger and bigger and bigger. And we take steps forward and we take steps backwards. Centering is the name of a book that just came out. It's a collection of essays by Unitarian Universalist ministers and religious educators of color. The subtitle is Navigating Race, Authenticity, and Power in Ministry. It is a collection of essays about their experience as Black, Indian, Asian, Hispanic, Unitarian Universalists in what is largely a white denomination. This book is one of the two common reads this year for Unitarian Universalists. Every year, a common read, or two, usually there are two books, this is one, is chosen. And Unitarian Universalists around the country are asked to read it and discuss it with people. And the themes of the book, or books, become at the center of General Assembly every year in terms of worship and theme and programming. So this year, in an effort to get Unitarian Universalists all over this area engaged with our common read, Rev. Beth Waring and I are doing a book group. I am obviously talking a little bit about this book today, Centering, and there will be a minister-led book discussion of this group on Saturday, December 2nd at 10 a.m. here at our church. Rev. Bev is going to preach on the other book, Daring Democracy, on January 21st, and there will be a book discussion at the Westboro UU Church on March 16th at 7 p.m. So we're inviting everyone in all the churches in the area to read this book and come together to discuss it. If you would like to order one or both books, just see me, we'll put in a congregational order. So I spent the last week reading the book, which was a little hairy because I didn't know if I was going to finish it in time to talk about it, but I did on Friday. Why are you laughing? As I read through the essays of the book, the title of the book made more and more sense, Centering. All the essays relate in some way to the experience of being invited into the circle of Unitarian Universalism and then pushed so far out to its outer rim that the ministers and religious educators of color sometimes couldn't tell if they were still in the circle or out. I know a number of people who wrote the essays. One is my friend Manish Mishra Mazzetti, who's our minister in Lincoln, Massachusetts. He is of Indian descent. And he joined All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church in Washington, D.C. many years ago. He was a younger man. At the time, he was employed as a diplomat in the Clinton State Department. And he joined All Souls, and after a bit was invited to be a preacher when the minister had a Sunday out of the pulpit. But he says the invitation came with a caveat. You can preach about Hinduism. But he thought, you know, it's an opportunity to talk a little bit about what Hinduism is. A lot of people don't understand it, and that's fine. And a little while later, he was invited to preach again and was told, you can give another sermon about Hinduism. At which time he began to realize there was a little bit of a problem. He describes the discomfort of people of color in a situation like that as being forced to represent. That as an individual, people of color are often asked, if not forced almost, to be a representative of their entire race or their entire ethnicity or their entire culture. And in so doing, they never really get to be themselves. White people are never asked to represent whiteness. No one ever asks white people, you can give a sermon about being white. And I know Manish fairly well. Manish was my clergy coach for a couple of years, and he's a great guy. And reading this essay, you know, I've heard him talk a little bit about this stuff before, of course, but reading the essay, it really hit me how this idea of having to represent, it's got to be a real burden. That you never really get seen for yourself. You never really get to occupy the center into which you might have been invited. One of the challenges he and other ministers of color report in various essays is that a congregation feels so good about themselves when they call a minister of color. Look at us living out our awesome liberal inclusive values. And many of the ministers and religious educators know that's great. But what also happens is they're also expected to act white. That when they start to bring in parts of who they are to Unitarian Universalism, such as my friend Derek Jackson, who tries to bring in stuff that he grew up with in the black church, there's disinterest at best and disdain at worst. So there's a lot of conflict reported throughout these essays about loving the theological freedom of Unitarian Universalism and seeing the inherent problems still in our tradition about really letting other experiences with us and to occupy the center. Being Indian, Manish says one of the things he deals with is this guru mentality. That being Indian, he's frequently expected to have this guru aura and energy about him. And when he doesn't seem to live up to that, a lot of the white people in his congregations have felt anywhere from disappointed to annoyed to even angry that he's not who they expect him to be. My friend Rosemary McNatt, who's now the president of Star King School for the Ministry out in California, says that the hardest thing for her to get used to being a black UU wasn't being accepted as a black person, because her church was also diverse, but being accepted as a theist. Growing up in a black church, God was always present. And she admits her theology of God's a lot different than the people she grew up with in her black church, but it's still there in some way. And it seemed almost forbidden at the church where she was brought into Unitarian Universalism at the Community Church in New York City. My friend Manish recounts, and Rosemary and a couple of people echo it, that the place where they came into Unitarian Universalism was big city churches. New York City, Chicago, San Francisco, All Souls in D.C. And they would come in and see this wonderful church, a wonderful theology, and they had to deal with racism and representing and other issues. But what really shocked them was when they went from their home congregation to begin their studies for ministry or religious education. And they report that how shocked they were to get to their classes on Unitarian Universalism in seminary and be the only person of color in the class. Because where they came from, in their churches were as diverse as the cities they lived in. But they found that all Unitarian Universalism wasn't like their congregation, that it was by and large very, very white. And so their experience in their congregation was great, more or less. But their bigger struggle was their place in Unitarian Universalism outside that home congregation. Being invited into the center and then being told to stay on the ring. It's a common problem. Our Unitarian ancestors in Transylvania faced it. People of color still face it. Women still face it. The LGBTQ community still faces it. We decenter all kinds of people for many reasons. The essays got me to think, especially in the last week, how our current government especially is trying to decenter experiences after years of work of trying imperfectly to center everyone together. That decentering is explicitly being sought now, and it divides us. As the events came out in the news about Harvey Weinstein, it was put front and center again how women's experiences are decentered. Not only does something violent and a violation happen to women, but when they talk about it, they're not believed. How much decentered can you get? You're not even allowed your own experience. That somehow it's not correct. People at the center, men, must speak out to other men at the center about misogyny and patriarchy in order to make the circle bigger. White people must speak to other white people about race to make the center bigger and more inclusive. When you hear people like me speak about these such things, and you maybe sound a little defensive, or everything's about race, or it's not that bad, we're making progress, I wonder how when we do that, we are still decentering other people's experience. We're not saying, oh, wow, that was your experience. I am sorry about that. Tell me some more about what it's like that you experience. Sometimes we get defensive. I'm not racist. I'm not homophobic. And when we do that, we tend to tighten that circle in. And we need to stay open and expansive. And that's a harder task. How is it so easy to decenter the experience of others? We look at the decentering going on, and I think most of us share the disgust at people of color being marginalized, the LGBTQ community being marginalized, immigrants being marginalized, Muslims being marginalized. And we think to ourselves, how can people do this and treat other people like that? But we all do it. I've even seen it here at church. In ways maybe that aren't so evident. I've seen it at all the churches I've worked at, actually. Especially when a congregation tries to make any changes. Eventually, voices rise up about, why is all this emphasis being put on change, or people who are new here aren't here yet? What about the people who have been here? And I think, that seems familiar to me. It seems familiar in ways I decenter people, and it seems familiar in the way we decenter people at any time, for any reason. We hear this in the news all the time about the Muslims and the immigrants And why are they coming here and taking our jobs? Being threatened with the new and the different, and feeling like you're forced to let other people into the circle. It's too crowded. But it doesn't have to be. I think in all experiences of decentering in our culture, and all the experience we gain from being the dominant culture, our culture forces us to think in a zero-sum mentality. That if I'm at the center, and more people get let in, me and my experience have to go out. Robert found out that wasn't so today. He found out he could be in the center, and so could anybody else who wanted to be in there. John C. Guzman would have been proud of him. A really good center person. When we begin to feel that we are being decentered, our anxiety goes up. We get defensive. Because if I'm not at the center, and someone else is, I'm on the outside. That's not the case. We can all be in the center. And yet when we let new people into that center, as we learned in the activity, the people in the center might feel, I think Robert put it, a little crowded but happy. It does. It feels crowded. It feels different. All of a sudden, we're not as comfortable and at ease in the center we had been used to occupying. But what we're doing is beginning to share the discomfort. Because for the people who are decentered, they're always uncomfortable. So when we are asked as white people, as straight people, as men, whatever puts us at the center, when we are asked as people at the center to make room, and we get defensive and angry and want to hold on to our territory and our ideas, we're uncomfortable. And we need to remember that. We need to share the discomfort. It's the only way everyone can get into the center and then make it comfortable. I highly recommend reading through these essays. It's a great book because it's not a book where you have to read it to beginning to end to get something out of it. You can read one or two essays and you can get a lot out of it. I'm done. You can borrow mine. And these experiences of people, you know, I read Derek Jackson's essay about how he feels so discentered. And Derek's awesome. I heard him speak this year at General Assembly. Man, he was great. I first met Derek when I was interviewing for the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, the committee that would approve my ordination, my fellowship. Derek had the appointment before me. And people had appointments before him and after me. Everybody, you know, was sitting in this waiting room. And Derek was the only person who had a huge smile on his face. He was the only person who didn't seem nervous. And we introduced ourselves to each other and said, "You don't seem nervous at all." And he lifts up his pant leg and he says, "Nope, I've got my lucky socks." And those socks are darn colorful, I can tell you that. And that's kind of Derek. He is just a person who likes to bring that kind of light and joy into the world. And so these essays and the issues Derek and others are raising, they're not separating me from him and an us and them, center and decenter, so much as inviting me into the center. When we are asked to make room in the center, it's like sharing anything. There won't be less for us because we share. There'll be some for everyone. It's not a zero-sum game. Making the center bigger is how we solve the problems. It's not a small, confined center where something goes in, something has to come out. The trick is, let's make the center as big as we need to. In doing that, we'll all be a little uncomfortable, instead of some people having the privilege of not being uncomfortable. Keeping the center to our dominant culture self from whatever angle, in a sense, is greedy and selfish and harmful. Looking back at our Transylvanian past, it teaches us, reminds us what it's like for Unitarianism to be oppressed and decentered. Looking at our present reality of people of color in Unitarian Universalism tells us what it's like for people now in our own faith, inside our faith, to be decentered. Our task is to take these lessons and create a future with a big, inclusive, welcoming center. Our task is to basically share in a little discomfort. It's the only way we can create a just and comfortable future for everyone.